Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Forrest over here, and welcome back to another reading live stream. Now I know what I said last night, that I was thinking about doing WWE 2K25 Universe Mode. Here's the kicker. Um, I will be working um a bit, not like early, but like early afternoon tomorrow, up until the early evening hour, like middle evening hours tomorrow, and then the day after that I'm working completely late hours. So what I'm doing here is I'm reading The Hobbit tonight, so that way we can finish it, and I can start reading Salem's Lot, which will be the next book, which will be on the next reading stream once I finish this book. So that way we can, kind of get a start for it. And then tomorrow night, for sure, no questions asked, I will be doing WWE 2K25 Universe Mode with the next episode of WCW, which is the second and final episode of WCW before King and Queen of the Ring. I'll probably do a poll and do King and Queen of the Ring together on the same night because there's not very many matches on each show. But I'll let you guys determine which one we do first. Whether we do the men's first or the ladies first. So that way we got all that going on. Um, and then after that, I will be doing the Salem's Lot reading. I will start reading the Salem's Lot book because you guys have been waiting very patiently for that, most likely than not. Um, so I'll be sure to be reading that here shortly, here soon. And then we're going back to our regularly scheduled U.S. history, Death Behind Every Door, Salem's Lot, and that process will begin again until eventually we finish the U.S. history book, which is the book that I expect to be finished after this, after I finish The Hobbit. So yeah. Anyway, and then of course, like I said, that would bring in Welcome to Dead House after I finish that book, and then after that we go back to um, our regularly scheduled poll because I expect Welcome to Dead House to be finished. I'm either doing it like part one, like a full reading, or a part one, part two, like I've done one or two other short books that I've read. I think the only one I did that for was Spy Kids Adventures book, which wasn't that bad, but it could have been better in my book, that one. But anyway, let's get started with reading The Hobbit. By reading, I mean finishing The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. You guys have been very patient. We're already about 4 minutes in, so without further ado, let's finish The Hobbit. And which also means once I finish this book, for the next 3 weeks, I'll be watching the 3 live-action Hobbit movies that were directed by Peter Jackson, who also gave us the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Um, I will probably watch the extended version, and I hope nobody is trying to bash in my door for absolutely no reason, because I'm not about that. And I know if someone were to barge into my room, I'll have to immediately mute the stream because I don't want any other family members' voices to be heard. Typically, how I am. Unless they, for some reason, decided to do that. Especially when I have a young family member in here. Not in here, but, in the house. And I really don't want them to be heard for obvious reasons. Safety is important, even when it's secondhand. So, without further ado, let's begin. Chapter 16. A Thief in the Night. Now the days passed slowly and wearily. Many of the dwarves spent their time piling and ordering the treasure, and now Thorin spoke of the Arkenstone of Thrain, and bade them eagerly to look for it in every corner. For the Arkenstone of my father, he said, is worth more than a river of gold. I said that in someone else's voice at first. Let me try that again. For the Arkenstone of my father, he said, is worth more than a river of gold in itself, and to me it is beyond price. The stone of all the treasures I name unto myself, and I will be avenged on anyone who finds it and withholds it. Bilbo heard these words and he grew afraid, wondering what would happen if the stone was found, wrapped in an old bundle of tattered oddments that he used as a pillow. All the same, he did not speak of it, for as the weariness of the days grew heavier, the beginnings of a plan had come into his little head. Things had gone on like this for some time, when the ravens brought news that Dane and more than 500 dwarves, hurrying from the Iron Hills, were now within about 2 days' march of Dale, coming from the northeast. But they cannot reach the mountain unmarked, said Ruach, and I fear lest there be battle in the valley. I do not call this counsel good. Though they are a grim folk, they are not likely to overcome the host that besets you. And even if they did so, what will you gain? Winter and snow is hastening behind them. How shall you be fed without the friendship and goodwill of the lands about you? The treasure is likely to be your death, though the dragon is no more. But Thorn was not moved. Winter and snow will fight both men and elves, he said, and they may find their dwelling in the waste grievous to bear. With my friends behind them and winter upon them, they will perhaps be in softer mood to parley with. That night Bilbo made up his mind. The sky was black and moonless. As soon as it was full dark, he went to a corner of an inner chamber just within the gate and drew from his bundle a rope, and also the Arkenstone wrapped in a rag. Then he climbed to the top of the wall. Only Baldur was there, for it was his turn to watch, and the dwarves kept only one watchman at a time. "It is mighty cold," said Baldur. "I wish we could have a fire up here as they have in the camp." "It is warm enough inside," said Bilbo. "I dare say, but I am bound here till midnight," rumbled the fat dwarf. "A sorry business altogether. Not that I venture to disagree with Thorin. May his beard grow ever long, yet he was ever a dwarf with a stiff neck." "Not as stiff as my legs," said Bilbo. "I am tired of stairs and stone passages. I would give a good deal for the feel of grass in my toes." "I would give a good deal for the feel of a strong drink in my throat, and for a soft bed after a good supper." "I can't give you those while the siege is going on, but it is long since I watched, and I will take your turn for you, if you like. There is no sleep in me tonight." "You are a good fellow, Mr. Baggins, and I will take your offer kindly. If there should be anything to note, rouse me first, and mind you, I will lie in the inner chamber to the left, not far away." "Off you go," said Bilbo. "I will wake you at midnight, and you can wake the next watchman." As soon as Baldur had gone, Bilbo put on his ring, fastened his rope, slipped down over the wall, and was gone. He had about 5 hours before him. Baldur would sleep. He could sleep at any time, and ever since the adventure in the forest, he was always trying to recapture the beautiful dreams he had then. And all the others were busy with Thorin. It was unlikely that any, even Filey or Kylie, would come out on the wall until it was their turn. It was very dark in the road after a while, when he left the newly made path and climbed down towards the lower course of the stream, was strange to him. At last he came to the bend where he had to cross the water, if he was to make for the camp as he wished. The bed of the stream was there shallow but already broad, and fording it in the dark was not easy for the little hobbit. He was nearly across when he missed his footing on a round stone and fell into the cold water with a splash. He had barely scrambled out on the far bank, shivering and spluttering, when up came elves in the gloom with bright lanterns and searched for the cause of the noise. That was no fish, one said. There's a spy about. Hide your lights! They will help him more than us, if it is that queer little creature that is said to be their servant. Servant indeed, snorted Bilbo, and in the middle of his snort he sneezed loudly, and the elves immediately gathered towards the sound. Let's have a light, he said. I am here if you want me. And he slipped off his ring and popped from behind a rock. They seized him quickly in spite of their surprise. Who are you? Are you the dwarves' hobbit? What are you doing? How did you get so far past our sentinels? They asked one another. They asked one after another. I am Mr. Bilbo Baggins, he answered. Companion of Thorin, if you want to know. I know your king well by sight, though perhaps he doesn't know me to look at. But Bard will remember me, and it is Bard I particularly want to see. Indeed, said they. And what may be your business? Whatever it is, it's my own, my good elves. But if you wish ever to get back to your own woods from this cold, cheerless place, he answered, shivering, you will take me along quick to a fire where I can dry, and then you will let me speak to your chiefs as quickly as may be. I have only an hour or two to spare. That is how it came about that some 2 hours after his escape from the gate, Bilbo was sitting beside a warm fire in front of a large tent, and there sat two, gazing curiously at him, both the elven king and bard. A hobbit in elvish armor, partly wrapped in an old blanket, was something new to them. Really, you know, Bilbo was saying in his best business manner, things are impossible. Personally, I'm tired of the whole affair. I wish I was back in the West in my own home, where folk are more reasonable. But I have an interest in this matter. 1/14th share, to be precise, according to a letter, which fortunately I believe I have kept. He drew from a pocket in his old jacket, which he still wore over his mail, crumpled and much folded. Thorin's letter that had been put under the clock on his mantelpiece in May. A share in the profits, mind you, he went on. I am aware of that. Personally, I am only too ready to consider all your claims carefully and deduct what is right from the total before putting in my own claim. However, you don't know Thorin Oakenshield as well as I do now. I assure you he is quite ready to sit on a heap of gold and starve, as long as you sit here. Well, let him, said the bard. Such a fool deserves to starve. Quite so, said Bilbo. I see your point of view. At the same time, winter is coming on fast. Before long, you will be having snow and whatnot, and supplies will be difficult, even for elves, I imagine. Also, there will be other difficulties. You have not heard of Dane and the dwarves of the Iron Hills? We have, a long time ago. But what has he got to do with this? Asked the king. I thought as much. I say I have some information you have not got. Dane, I may tell you, is now less than 2 days' march off. It has at least 500 grim dwarves with him, a good many of them that have had experience in the dreadful dwarf and goblin wars, of which you have no doubt heard. When they arrive, there may be serious trouble. Why do you tell us this? Are you betraying your friends, or are you threatening us? Asked Bard grimly. My dear Bard, squeaked Bilbo, don't be so hasty. I never met such suspicious folk. I am merely trying to avoid trouble for all concerned. Now I will make you an offer. Let us hear it, they said. You may see it, said he. It is this. And he drew forth the earthen stone and threw away the wrapping. Oh, excuse me. The elven king himself, whose eyes were used to things of wonder and beauty, stood up in amazement. Even Bard gazed marveling at it in silence. It was as if a globe had been filled with moonlight and hung before them in a net woven of the glint and frosty stars. This is the Arthur Stone of Thrain, said Bilbo, the heart of the mountain, and it is also the heart of Thorin. He values it above a river of gold. I give it to you. It will aid you in your bargaining. Then Bilbo, not without a shudder, not without a glance of longing, handed the marvelous stone to Bard, and he held it in his hand, as though dazed. But how is it yours to bid? He asked at last with an effort. Oh, well, said the hobbit uncomfortably. It isn't exactly, but, well, I am willing to let it stand against all my claim, don't you know. I may be a burglar, or so they say. Personally, I never really felt like one, but I am an honest one, I hope, more or less. Anyway, I'm going back now, and the dwarves can do what they like to me. I hope you will find it useful. The Elven King looked at Bilbo with a new wonder. Bilbo Baggins, he said, you are more worthy to wear the armor of elf princes than many that have looked more comely in it. But I wonder if Thorin Openshield will see it so. I have more knowledge of dwarves in general than you have, perhaps. I advise you to remain with us, and here you shall be honored and thrice welcome. Thank you very much, I am sure, said Bilbo with a bow. But I don't think I ought to leave my friends like this, after all we have gone through together. And I promised to wake old Bombur at midnight, too. Really, I must be going, and quickly. Nothing they could say would stop him, so an escort was provided for him, and as he went, both the king and Bard saluted him with honor. As they passed through the camp, an old man, wrapped in a dark cloak, rose from a tent door where he was sitting and came towards them. Well done, Mr. Baggins, he said, clapping Bilbo on the back. There is always more about you than anyone expects. It was Gandalf. For the first time for many a day, Bilbo was really delighted. But there's no time for all the questions that he immediately wished to ask. All in good time, said Gandalf. Things are drawing towards the end now, unless I am mistaken. There is an unpleasant time just in front of you, but keep your heart up. You may come through all right. There is news brewing that even the ravens have not heard. Good night. Puzzled but cheered, Bilbo hurried on. He was guided to a safe ford and set across dry, and then he said farewell to the elves and climbed carefully back towards the gate. Great weariness began to come over him, but it was well before midnight when he clambered up the rope again. It was still where he had left it. He untied it and hid it, and then he sat down on the wall and wondered anxiously what would happen next. At midnight he woke up Bombur, and then in a turn rolled himself up in his corner, without listening to the old dwarf's thanks, which he thought he had hardly earned. He was soon fast asleep, forgetting all his worries till the morning. As a matter of fact, he was dreaming of eggs and bacon. Chapter 17. The Clouds Burst. Next day the trumpets rang early in the camp. Soon a single runner was seen hurrying along the narrow path. At a distance he stood and hailed them, asking whether Thorin would now listen to another embassy, since new tidings had come to hand, and matters were changed. "That will be Dane," said Thorin when he heard. "They will have caught wind of his coming. I thought that would alter their mood. Bid them come few in number and weaponless, and I will hear," he called to the messenger. About midday the banners of the forest and the lake were seen to be borne forth again. A company of 20 was approaching. At the beginning of the narrow way, they laid aside sword and spear, and came on towards the gate. Wondering, the dwarves saw that among them were both Bard and the Elven King, before whom an old man wrapped in cloak and hood bore a strong casket of iron-bound wood. "Hail, Thorin!" said Bard. "Are you still of the same mind?" "My mind does not change with the rising and setting of a few suns," answered Thorin. "Did you come to ask me idle questions? Still the elf host has not departed as I bade. Till then you come in vain to bargain with me. Is there nothing for which you would yield any of your gold? Nothing that you or your friends have to offer." "What of the Arkenstone of Thrain?" said he, and at the same moment the old man opened the casket and held aloft the jewel. The light leapt from his hand, bright and white in the morning. Then Thorin was struck dumb with amazement and confusion. No one spoke for a long while. Thorin at length broke the silence, and his voice was thick with wrath. "That stone was my father's and is mine," he said. "Why should I purchase my own?" But wonder overcame him, and he added, "But how came you by the heirloom of my house, if there is need to ask such a question of thieves?" "We are not thieves," Bard answered. "Your own we will give back in return for our own." "How came you by it?" shouted Thorin in a gathering rage. "I gave it to them," squeaked Bilbo, who was peering over the wall by now in a dreadful fright. "You! You!" cried Thorin, turning upon him and grasping him with both hands. "You miserable Hobbit! You wonder-sized burglar!" He shouted at a loss for words, and he shook poor Bilbo like a rabbit. "By the beard of Durin! I wish I had Gandalf here! Curse him for his choice of you! May his beard wither! As for you, I will throw you to the rocks!" He cried and lifted Bilbo in his arms. "Stray, your wish is granted," said a voice. The old man with the casket threw aside his hood and cloak. "Here is Gandalf, and none too soon, it seems. If you don't like my burglar, please don't damage him. Put him down and listen first to what he has to say." "You all seem in league," said Thorin, dropping Bilbo on the top of the wall. "Never again will I have dealings with any wizard or his friends. What have you to say, you descendant of rats?" Dear me," said Bilbo. "I am sure this is all very uncomfortable. You may remember saying that I might choose my own 14th share. Perhaps I took it too literally. I have been told that dwarves are sometimes polite in word than in deed. That the time was all the same, when you seemed to think that I had been of some service. Descendant of rats indeed! Is this all the service of you and your family that I was promised, Thorin? Take it that I have disposed of my share as I wished, and let it go at that." "I will," said Thorin grimly, "and I will let you go at that. And may we never speak again!" Then he turned and spoke over the wall. "I am betrayed," he said. It was rightly thus that I could not forbear to redeem the earthen stone, the treasure of my house. For it I will give 1/14th share of the hoard in silver and gold, setting aside the gems, but that shall be accounted the promised share of this traitor. And with that reward he shall depart, and you can divide it as you will. He will get little enough, I doubt not. Take him, if you wish him to live, and no friendship of mine goes with him. Get down now to your friends, he said to Bilbo, or I will throw you down. What about the gold and silver? Asked Bilbo. That shall follow after, as can be arranged, said he. Get down! Until then we keep the stone, cried Bard. You are not making as very splendid figure as King under the mountain, said Gandalf. But things may change yet. They may indeed, said Thorin. And already, so strong was the bewilderment of the treasure upon him, he was pondering whether by the help of Dane he might not recapture the Arkenstone and withhold a share of the reward. And so Bilbo was swung down from the wall and departed with nothing for all his troubles, except the armor which Thorin had given him already. More than one of the dwarves in their hearts felt shame and pity at his going. Farewell, he cried to them. We may meet again as friends. Be off, called Thorin. You have mail upon you which was made by my folk, and is too good for you. It cannot be pierced by arrows, but if you do not hasten, I will string your miserable feet. So be swift. Not so hasty, said Bard. We will give you until tomorrow. At noon we will return and see if you have brought from the hoard this portion that is to be set against the stone. If that is done without deceit, then we will depart, and the elf host will go back to the forest. In the meanwhile, farewell! With that they went back to the camp, but Thorin sent messengers by Roak, telling Dane of what had passed, and bidding him come with wary speed. Well, Thorin is not happy. He feels very betrayed by Bilbo. I'm surprised. Well, on the one hand, it makes sense for Bilbo to out himself, because usually when someone else outs another person, that makes it even worse when you think about it. So yeah. That day passed, and the night. The next day the wind shifted west, and the air was dark and gloomy. The morning was still early when a cry was heard in the camp. Runners came in to report that a host of dwarves had appeared round the eastern spur of the mountain, and was now hastening to Dale. Dane had come. He had hurried on through the night, and so had come upon them sooner than they had expected. Each one of his folk was clad in a hauberk of steel mail that hung to his knees, and his legs were covered with hose of a fine and flexible metal mesh, the secret of whose making was possessed by the Danes' people. The dwarves were exceedingly strong for their height, but most of these were strong even for dwarves. In battle they wielded heavy two-handed mattocks, but each of them had also a short broad sword at his side, and a round shield slung at his back. Their beards were forked and plated and thrust into their belts. Their cuffs were of iron, and they were shod with iron, and their faces were grim. Trumpets called men and elves to arms. Before long the dwarves could be seen coming up the valley at a great pace. They halted between the river and the eastern spur, but a few held on their way, and crossing the river drew near the camp. And there they laid down their weapons and held up their hands in sign of peace. Bard went out to meet them, and with him went Bilbo. We are sent from Dane, son of Nain, they said when questioned. We are hastening to our kinsmen in the mountain, since we learn that the kingdom of old is renewed. But who are you that sit in the plain as foes before defended walls? This of course in polite and rather old-fashioned language of such occasions means simply, you have no business here. We are going on, so make way or we shall fight you. They meant to push on between the mountain and the loop of the river, for the narrow land there did not seem to be strongly guarded. Bard, of course, refused to allow the dwarves to go straight onto the mountain. He was determined to wait until the gold and silver had been brought out in exchange for the Arcane Stone, for he did not believe that this would be done. If once the fortress was manned with so large and warlike a company, they had brought with them a great store of supplies, for the dwarves can carry very heavy burdens, and nearly all of Dane's folk, in spite of their rapid march, bore huge packs on their backs in addition to their weapons. They would stand a siege for weeks, and by that time, yet more dwarves might come, and yet more, for Thorin had many relatives. Also, they would be able to reopen and guard some other gate, so that the besiegers would have to encircle the whole mountain, and for that they had not sufficient numbers. These were, in fact, precisely their plans, for the Raven, for the Raven messengers had been busy between Thorin and Dane, but for the moment the way was barred. So after angry words, the dwarf messengers retired, muttering in their beards. Bard then sent messengers at once to the gate, but they found no gold or payment. Arrows came forth as soon as they were within shot, and they hastened back in dismay. In the camp all was now astir, as if for battle, for the dwarves of Dane were advancing along the eastern bank. Fools! laughed Bard. To come thus beneath the mountain's arm! They do not understand war above ground, whatever they may know of battle in the mines. There are many of our archers and spearmen now hidden in the rocks upon their right flank. Dwarf mail may be good, but they will soon be hard put to it. Let us settle them now for both sides, before they are fully rested. But the Elven king said, Long will I tarry, ere I begin this war for gold. The dwarves cannot pass us unless we will, or do anything that we cannot mark. Let us hope still for something that will bring reconciliation. Our advantage in numbers will be enough, if in the end it must come to unhappy blows. But he reckoned without the dwarves. The knowledge that the Arkenstone was in the hands of the besiegers burned in their thoughts. Also they guessed the hesitation of Bard and his friends, and resolved to strike while they debated. Suddenly, without a signal, they sprang silently forward to attack. Bows twanged and arrows whistled. Battle was about to be joined. Still more suddenly, a darkness came on with dreadful swiftness. A black cloud hurried over the sky. Winter thunder on a wild wind roaring up and rumbled in the mountains, and lightning lit its peak. And beneath the thunder another blackness could be seen, whirling forward. But it did not come with the wind. It came from the north, like a vast cloud of birds, so dense that no light could be seen between their wings. Halt! cried Gandalf, who appeared suddenly and stood alone, with arms uplifted between the advancing dwarves and the ranks awaiting them. Halt! He called in a voice like thunder, and his staff blazed forward with a flash like the lightning. Dread has come upon you all! Alas! It has come more swiftly than I guessed. The goblins are upon you! Fold of the north is coming! Old Dane, whose father you slew in Moria! Behold! The bats are above his army like a sea of locusts. They ride upon wolves, and wargs are in their train. Amazement and confusion fell upon them all. Even as Gandalf had been speaking to the dark, even as Gandalf had been speaking, the darkness grew. The dwarves halted and all gazed at the sky. The elves cried out with many voices. Come! called Gandalf. "There is yet time for counsel. Let Dane, son of Nain, come swiftly to us." I'm gonna get me something to drink after this chapter. I'm feeling a little bit tired, and that would put me at the halfway mark. But here we go, guys. It has been hyped up at certain parts of the book, and now here we are. So began a battle that none had expected, and it was called the Battle of Five Armies, and it was very terrible. Upon one side were the goblins and the wild wolves, and upon the other were elves and men and dwarves. This is how it fell out. Ever since the fall of the great goblin of the misty mountains, the hatred of their race for the dwarves had been rekindled to fury. Messengers had passed to and fro between all their cities, colonies, and strongholds, for they resolved now to win the dominion of the north. Tidings they had gathered in secret ways, and in all the mountains there was a foraging and arming. Then they marched and gathered by hill and valley, going over by tunnel or under dark, until around and beneath the great mountain Gundabad of the north, where was their capital. A vast host was assembled, ready to sweep down in time of storm unawares upon the south. Then they learned of the death of Smaug, and joy was in their hearts, and they hastened night after night through the mountains, and came thus at last on a sun from the north hard on the heels of Dane. Not even the ravens knew of their coming, until they came out in the broken lands which divided the lonely mountain from the hills behind. How much Gandalf knew could not be said, but it is plain that he had not expected the sudden assault. This is the plan that he made in council with the Elven King, and with Bard, and with Dane, for the Dwarf Lord now joined them. The goblins were the foes of all, and at their coming all other quarrels were forgotten. Their only hope was to lure the goblins into the valley, between the arms of the mountain, and themselves to man the great spurs that struck south and east. Yet this would be perilous. If the goblins were in sufficient numbers to overrun the mountain itself, and so attack them also from behind and above, but there was no time to make any other plan, or to summon any help. Soon the thunder passed, rolling away to the southeast, but the bad cloud came, flying lower, over the shoulder of the mountain, and whirled above them, shutting out the light and filling them with dread. "To the mountain!" called Bard. "To the mountain! Let us take our places while there is yet time!" On the southern spur, in its lower slopes and in the rocks at its feet, the elves were set. On the eastern spur were men and dwarves, but Bard and some of the nimblest of men and elves climbed to the height of the eastern shoulder to gain a view to the north. Soon they could see the lands before the mountains, feet black with a hurrying multitude. Ere long the vanguards whirled round the spur's end and came rushing into Dale. These were the swiftest wolf riders, and already their cries and howls rent the air afar. A few brave men were strung before them to make a feint of resistance, and many there fell before the rest drew back and fled to either side. As Gandalf had hoped, the goblin army had gathered behind the resisted vanguard, and poured now in rage into the valley, driving wildly up between the arms of the mountain, seeking for the foe. Their banners were countless, black and red, and they came on like the tide in fury and disorder. It was a terrible battle, the most dreadful of all Bilbo's experiences, and the one which at the time he hated most. Which is to say, it was the one he was most proud of, and most fond of recalling long afterwards, although he was quite unimportant in it. Actually, I may say he put on his ring early in the business and vanished from sight, if not from all danger. A magic ring of that sort is not a complete protection in a goblin charge, nor does it stop flying arrows and wild spears, but it does help him getting out of the way, and it prevents your head from being specially chosen for a sweeping stroke by a goblin swordsman. The elves were the first to charge. Their hatred for the goblins is cold and bitter. Their spears and swords shone in the gloom and the gleam of chill flame. So deadly was the wrath of the hands that held them. As soon as the host of these enemies was dense in the valley, they sent against it a shower of arrows, and each flickered as it fled as if with stinging fire. Behind the arrows, 1,000 of their spearmen leaped, leaped down and charged. The yells were deafening. The rocks were stained black with goblin blood. Just as the goblins were recovering from the onslaught and the elf charge was halted, there rose from across the valley a deep-throated roar, with cries of Moriah and Dane! Dane! The dwarves of the Iron Hills plunged in, wielding their mattocks upon the other side, and beside them came the men of the lake with long swords. Panic came upon the goblins, and even as they turned to meet this new attack, the elves charged again with renewed numbers. Already many of the goblins were flying back down the river to escape from the trap, and many of their own wolves were turning upon them and raiding the dead and the wounded. Victory seemed at hand when a cry rang out on the heights above. Goblins had scaled the mountain from the other side, and already many were on the slope above the gate, and others were streaming down recklessly, heedless of those that fell screaming from cliff and precipice to attack the spurs from above. Each of these could be reached by paths that ran down from the main mass of the mountain in the center, and the defenders had too few to bar the way for long. Victory now vanished from hope. They had only stemmed the first onslaught of the flight of the black tide. The black tide. Day drew on. The goblins gathered again in the valley. There a host of wargs came ravening, and them came, and with them came the bodyguard of Bold, goblins of huge size with scimitars of steel. Soon actual darkness was coming into a stormy sky, while still the great bats swirled around the heads and ears of elves and men, or fastened vampire-like on the stricken. Now Bard was fighting to defend the eastern spur, and yet driven slowly back, and the elf lords were at bay with about their king upon the southern arm, near to the watch post on Ravenhill. Suddenly there was a great shout, and from the gate came a trumpet call. They had forgotten Thorin! Part of the wall, moved by levers, fell outward with a crash into a pool. Out, out leapt the king under the mountain, and his companions followed him. Hood and cloak were gone. They were in shining armor, and red light leaped from their eyes. In the gloom the great dwarf gleamed like gold in a dying fire. Rocks were hurled down from on high by the goblins above, but they held on, leaped down to the fall's foot and rushed forward to battle. Wolf and rider fell or fled before them. Thorn wielded his axe with mighty strokes, and nothing seemed to harm him. To me! To me! To elves and men! To me! All my kinsfolk! He cried, and his voice shook like a horn in the valley. Sorry. Down, heedless of order, rushed all the dwarfs of Dane to his help. Down too came many of the late men, for Bard could not restrain them, and out upon the other side came many of the spearmen of the elves. Once again the goblins were stricken in the valley, and they were piled in heaps heaps till Dale was dark and hideous with their corpses. The warrants were scattered, and Thorin drove right against the bodyguard of Bold, but he could not pierce their ranks. Already behind him, among the goblin dead lay many men and many dwarves, and many a fair elf, that should have lived yet long ages merrily in the wood. And as the valley widened, his onset grew ever slower. His numbers were too few. His flanks were unguarded. Soon the attackers were attacked, and they were forced into a great ring, facing every way, being hemmed all about with goblins and wolves returning to the assault. The bodyguard of Bold came howling against them, and drove in upon their ranks like glaves upon cliffs of sand. Their friends could not help them, for the assault from the mountain was renewed with redoubled force, and upon either side men and elves were being slowly beaten down. Beaten down. At all this Bilbo looked with misery. He had taken his stand on Ravenhill among the elves, partly because there was more chance of escape from that point, and partly with the more Tookish part of his mind, because if he was going to be in a last desperate stand, he preferred on the whole to defend the Elven King. Gandalf, too, I may say, was there, sitting on the ground as if in deep thought, preparing, I suppose, some last blast of magic before the end. That did not seem far off. It will not be long now, thought Bilbo, before the goblins win the gate, and we are all slaughtered or driven down and captured. Really it is enough to make one weep after all one has gone through. I would rather old Smaug had been left with all of the wretched treasure that, than that these wild creatures should get it, and poor old Bombur and Balin and Filey and Kylie and all the rest come to a bad end. And Bard too, and the late man and the mystery elves. Misery me! I have heard songs of many battles, and I have always understood that defeat may be glorious. It seems very uncomfortable, not to say distressing. I wish I was well out of it. The clouds were torn by the wind, and a red sunset slashed the west. Seeing the sudden gleam in the gloom, Bilbo looked round. He gave a great cry as he had seen a sight that made his heart skip, or his heart leap, dark shapes small yet majestic against the distant glow. "The eagles! The eagles!" he shouted. "The eagles are coming!" Bilbo's eyes were seldom wrong. The eagles were coming down the wind, line after line, in such a host as must have gathered from all the eyries of the north. "The eagles! The eagles!" Bilbo cried, dancing around him, and dancing and waving his arms. If the elves could not see him, they could not hear him. Soon they too took up the cry, and it echoed across the valley. Many wondering eyes looked up, though as yet nothing could be seen except for the southern, southern shoulders of the mountain. "The eagles!" cried Bilbo once more. But at that moment a strong hurtling from above smote heavily on his helm, and he fell with a crash and knew no more. Right, so we are officially 2 chapters away from the end of the book. But it's ironic we're only an hour in. But I want to take this chance real quick to get me something to drink. I will be right back. Oh, did not mean to do that. Did not mean to do that. I just got back and I got me an Orange Crush. If you have not had an Orange Crush before and you know a place where you could probably get one, if you like orange drinks, get one. This is honestly my favorite orange drink when it comes to pop. Nothing tastes better than Orange Crush in my book. Mm. But don't leave it in the fridge for too long. I've done that before, and yeah, just don't leave it in the fridge for too long, because then it probably tastes little less orange drink and a little bit more just straight up cold drink. I mean, if you also want to make it into like a slushy kind of thing, you could probably keep it in the freezer for a certain amount of time, and then probably you might want to probably uh, I don't know how easy it could be to dump out the slushy kind of that whole kind of slushy thing, but yeah. Anyway, like I said, we are now 2 chapters away. This is our penultimate chapter. And honestly, I gotta say, well, I'm actually gonna say what I'm gonna say about the book after I'm done reading it, because I think that makes the most amount of sense. But yeah, they do have, alongside, after this chapter, um, they do have, they do have, um, the first chapter of the Fellowship of the Ring. I, unfortunately, will not read it. I will not read it because it looks too damn long for my reading. But yeah, that is. But if you guys want to read it for a bit, and then if it's still something you fancy, there it is. I, for one, am kind of stuck with all 3 books because I have a version of the Lord of the Rings trilogy where it's all 3 books in one. Is that a bad thing? I don't think so. Personally, that version of the Lord of the Rings books all in one book, that is honestly the second edition of that. Because I remember the one that I had, that I remember it was either my school library or a teacher of mine that I had a copy of the book where it had Gandalf played by Sir Ian McKellen, one of the greatest British actors of all time. If you don't know him in The Lord of the Rings, you probably have seen him as Magneto in a number of X-Men movies. Yeah, he played as Magneto in the X-Men movie, in a number of the X-Men movies. Um, that's honestly the only movies that I recognize that I know of him from. And he also played really well as Magneto in those movies too, which is why they kept bringing him back every so often. Which is and also of course you had Sir Patrick Stewart as Professor X, another incredible actor. I grew up with Patrick Stewart. Little quick fun fact before I read this chapter. I grew up with Patrick Stewart primarily because of Star Trek. Star Trek: The Next Generation. I watched, and my dad has every single movie from Star Trek: The Next Generation. Star Trek Generations, First Contact, Insurrection, and a movie that some like and some don't like, Nemesis. Personally, it's like, I like it for the most part. There are some moments where I'm just like, okay, that happened. But for the most part, I enjoyed that movie. It's like the black sheep of the TNG movies. Let's be honest. But I personally like it. I think it also had Tom Hardy in one of his in as the main villain, which I think I don't know how I feel about that villain origin story, but whatever. Anyway, that's Star Trek. This is the Hobbit. Let's get back to the Hobbit, because I'm pretty sure you guys want me to read the rest of the book, the rest of the chapters. Chapter 18: The Return Journey. When Bilbo came to himself, he was literally by himself. He was lying on the flat stones of Ravenhill, and no one was near. A cloudless day, but cold was brought above him. He was shaking, and as chilled as stone, but his head burned with fire. Now I wonder what has happened, he said to himself. At any rate, I am not yet one of the fallen heroes, but I suppose there is still time enough for that. He sat up painfully. Looking into the valley, he could see no living goblins. After a while, his head cleared a little. He thought he could see elves moving in the rocks below. He rubbed his eyes. Surely there was a camp still in the plain some distance off. And there was a coming and going about the gate. Dwarves seemed to be busy removing the wall, but all was deadly still. There was no call and no echo of a song. Sorrow seemed to be in the air. Victory after all, I suppose, he said, feeling his aching head. Well, it seems a very gloomy business. Suddenly he was aware of a man climbing up and coming towards him. Hello there, he called with a shaky voice. Hello there! What news? What voice is it that speaks among the stones? Said the man, halting and peering about him not far from where Bilbo sat. Then Bilbo remembered his ring. Well, I'm blessed, said he. This invisibility has its drawbacks after all. Otherwise, I suppose I might have spent a warm and comfortable night in bed. Comedy. Old school comedy from back in these times. Gotta love it. It's me, Bilbo Baggins, companion of Thorin, he cried, hurriedly taking off the ring. It is well that I have found you, said the man, striding forward. You are needed, and we have looked for you long. You would have been numbered among the dead, who are many, if Gandalf the wizard had not said that your voice was last heard in this place. I have been sent to look here for the last time. Are you much hurt? A nasty knock on the head, I think, said Bilbo. But I have a helm and a hard skull. All the same, I feel sick and my legs are like straws. I will carry you down to the camp in the valley, said the man, and picked him lightly up. The man was swift and sure-footed. It was not long before Bilbo was set down before a tent in Dale, and then stood Gandalf, with his arm in a sling. Even the wizard had not escaped without a wound, and there were few unharmed in all the host. When Gandalf saw Bilbo, he was delighted. Baggins! He exclaimed. Well, I never! Alive and after all, I am glad. I began to wonder if even your luck would see you through. A terrible business, and it nearly was disastrous. But other news can wait. Come, he said more gravely. You are called for. And, leading the hobbit, he took them within the tent. Hail, Thorin, he said as he entered. I have brought him. There indeed lay Thorin Oakenshield, wounded with many wounds, and his rent armor and notched axe were cast upon the floor. He looked up as Bilbo came beside him. Farewell, good thief, he said. I go now to the halls of waiting to sit beside my fathers until the world is renewed. Since I leave now all gold and silver and go where it is of little worth, I wish to part in friendship from you, and I would take back my words and deeds at the gate. Bilbo knelt on one knee filled with sorrow. Farewell, King, under the mountain, he said. This is a bitter adventure, if it must end so, and not a mountain of gold can amend it. Yet I am glad that I have shared in your perils. That has been more than any Baggins deserves. No, said Thorin. There is more in you of good than you know, child of the kindly West. Some courage and some wisdom, blended in measure. If more of us valued food and cheer, and song above hoarded gold, it would be a merrier world. But sad or merry, I must leave it now. Farewell. Then Bilbo turned away, and he went by himself, and sat alone wrapped in a blanket, and, whether you believe it or not, he wept until his eyes were red and his voice was hoarse. He was a kindly little soul. Indeed, it was long before he had the heart to make a joke again. A mercy it is, he said at last to himself, that I woke up when I did. I wish Thorin were living, and I am glad that we parted in kindness. You are a fool, Bilbo Baggins, and you made a great mess of that business with the stone, and there was a battle in spite of all your efforts to buy peace and quiet. But I suppose you can hardly be blamed for that. I was going to say real quickly, rest in peace, Thorin. You may have gone a little bit crazy near the end of the journey, but you were still a good ally. Rest in peace. All that had happened after he was stunned, Bilbo learned later, but it gave him more sorrow than joy, and he was now weary of his adventure. He was aching in his bones for the homeward journey. That, however, was a little delayed, so in the meantime I will tell something of events. The eagles had long had suspicion of the goblins mustering. From their watchfulness, the movements in the mountains could not be altogether hid. So they too had gathered in great numbers, under the great eagle on the misty mountains, and at length, smelling battle from afar, they had come speeding down the gale in the nick of time. They and ones who dislodged the goblins from the mountain slopes, casting them over precipices, or driving them down shrieking and bewildered among their foes. It was not long before they had freed the lonely mountain, and elves and men on either side of the valley could come at last to the help of the battle below. But even with the eagles, they were still outnumbered. In that last hour, Beorn himself had appeared. No one knew how or from where. He came alone and in bear shape, and he seemed to have grown almost to giant size in his wrath. The roar of his voice was like drums and guns, and he tossed wolves and goblins from his path like straws and feathers. He fell upon their rear, and broke like a clap of thunder through the ring. The dwarves were making a standstill about their lords upon a low, rounded hill. Then Beorn stooped and lifted Thorin, who had fallen pierced with spears, and bore him out of the fray. Swiftly he returned, and his wrath was redoubled, so that nothing could withstand him, and no weapon seemed to bite upon him. He scattered the bodyguard, and pulled down Bolg himself and crushed him. Then dismay fell on the goblins, and they fled in all directions. But weariness left their enemies with the coming of new hope, and they pursued them closely, and prevented most of them from escaping where they could. They drove many of them into the running river, and such as fled south or west they hunted into the marshes about the forest river, and there the greatest part of the last fugitives perished, while those that came hardly to the wood elves' realm were there slain, or drawn in to die deep in the trackless dark of Mirkwood. Songs have said that 3 parts of the goblin warriors of the north perished on that day, and the mountains had peace for many a year. Victory had been assured before the fall of night, but the pursuit was still on foot when Bilbo returned to the camp, and not many were in the valley, save the more grievously wounded. "Where are the eagles?" he asked Gandalf that evening, as he lay wrapped in many warm blankets. "Some are in the hunt," said the wizard, "but most have gone back to their eyries. They were not to stay here, and departed with the first light of morning. Dane has crowned their chief with gold, and sworn friendship with them forever. I am sorry. I should have liked to see them again," said Bilbo sleepily. "Perhaps I shall see them on the way home. I suppose I shall be going home soon?" "As soon as you like," said the wizard. Actually, it was some days before Bilbo really set out. They buried Thorin deep beneath the mountain, and Bard laid the Arkenstone upon his breast. "There let it lie till the mountains fall," he said. "May it bring good fortune to all his folk that dwell hereafter." Upon his tomb the Elven King then laid Orcrist, the elvish sword that had been taken from Thorin in captivity. It is said in songs that it gleamed ever in the dark if foes approached, and the fortress of the dwarves could not be taken by surprise. There now Dain, son of Nain, took up his abode, and he became king under the mountain, and in time many other dwarves gathered to his throne in the ancient halls. Of the 12 companions of Thorin, 10 remained. Fili and Kili had fallen defending him with shield and body, for he was their mother's elder brother. The others remained with Dain, for Dain dealt his treasure well. There was, of course, no longer any question of dividing the hoard in such shares as had been planned, to Balin and Dwalin, and Dori and Nori and Ori, and Oin and Goin and Bifur, and Bofer and Bomber, or to Bilbo. Yet a 14th share of all the silver and gold, wrought and unwrought, was given up to Bard. For Dain said, "We will honor the agreement of the dead, and he has now the Arkenstone in his keeping." Even a 14th share was wealth exceedingly great, greater than that of many mortal kings. From that treasure Bard sent much gold to the master of Lake Town, and he rewarded his followers and friends freely. To the Elven King he gave the emeralds of Girion, such jewels as he most loved, which Dain had restored to him. Excuse me. To Bilbo he said, "This treasure is as much yours as it is mine, though old agreements cannot stand, since so many have a claim in its winning and defense. Yet even though you were willing to lay aside all your claim, I should wish that the words of Thorin, of which he repented, should not prove true, that we should give you little. I would reward you most richly of all." "Very kind of you," said Bilbo, "but really it is a relief to me. How on earth should I have got all that treasure home without war and murder all along the way? I don't know. And I don't know what I should have done with it when I got home. I am sure it is better in your hands." In the end he would only take 2 small chests, one filled with silver and the other with gold, such as one strong pony could carry. That will be quite as much as I can manage," said he. At last the time came for him to say goodbye to his friends. "Farewell, Balin," he said, "and farewell, Dwalin, and farewell, Dori, Nori, Ori, Oin, Fifer, Bofer, and Bomber, may your beards never grow thin. And turning towards the mountain, he added, Farewell, Thorin Oakenshield, and Filey and Kiley. May your memory never fade. Then the dwarves bowed low before their gate, but words stuck in their throats. Goodbye and good luck wherever you fare, said Balin last. If ever you visit us again, when our halls are made fair once more, then the feast shall indeed be splendid. If ever you are passing my way, said Bilbo, don't wait to knock. Tea is at 4, but any of you are welcome at any time. Then he turned away. The elf host was on the march, and if it was sadly lessened, yet many were glad, for now the northern world would be merrier for many a long day. The dragon was dead, and the goblins overthrown, and their hearts looked forward after a winter to a spring of joy. Gandalf and Bilbo rode behind the Elven King, and beside them strode Beorn, once again in the man's shape, and he laughed and sang in a loud voice upon the road. So they went on until they drew near to the borders of Mirkwood, to the north of the place where the forest river ran out. Then they halted, for the wizard and Bilbo would not enter the wood, even though the king bade them stay a while in his halls. They intended to go along the edge of the forest, and round its northern end in the waste that lay between it and the beginning of the Grey Mountains. It was a long and cheerless road, but now that the goblins were crushed, it seemed safer to them than the dreadful pathways under the trees. Moreover, Beorn was going that way too. Farewell, O Elven King, said Gandalf. Merry be the greenwood while the world is yet young, and merry be all your folk. Farewell, O Gandalf, said the king. May you ever appear when you are most needed and least expected, though when the oftener you appear in my halls, the better shall I be pleased. I beg of you, said Bilbo, stammering and standing on one foot, to accept this gift. And he brought out a necklace of silver and pearls that Dain had given them at their parting. In what way have I earned such a gift, O Hobbit? Said the king. Well, I thought, don't you know, said Bilbo, rather confused, that, some little return should be made for your, hospitality. I mean, even a burglar has his feelings. I have drunk much of your wine and eaten much of your bread. I will take your gift, O Bilbo the Magnificent, said the king gravely, and I name you elf-friend and blessed. May your shadow never grow less, or stealing would be too easy. Ha ha! Farewell! He didn't say that he laughed, but honestly, I would not be surprised if he was laughing at that line. Then the elves turned towards the forest, and Bilbo started on his long road home. He had many hardships and adventures before he got back. The wild was still the wild, and there were many other things in it in those days besides goblins, but he was well guided and well guarded. The wizard was with him, and Beorn for much of the way, and he was never in great danger again. Anyway, by midwinter, Gandalf and Bilbo had come all the way back along both edges of the forest to the doors of Beorn's house, and there for a while they both stayed. Yuletide was warm and merry there, and the men came from far and wide to feast at Beorn's bidding. The goblins of the Misty Mountains were now few and terrified, and hidden in the deepest holes they could find, and the warrants had vanished from the woods, so that men went abroad without fear. Beorn indeed became a great chief afterwards in those regions, and ruled with the wide land between the mountains and the wood. And it is said that for many generations the men of his line had the power of taking bear's shape, and some were grim men and bad, but most were in heart like Bjorn, if less in size and strength. In their days the last goblins were hunted from the misty mountains, and a new peace came over the edge of the wild. It was spring, and a fair one with mild weathers and a bright sun, before Bilbo and Gandalf took their leave, at last of Beorn, and thought he longed for home. Bilbo looked with regret, for the flowers of the gardens of Beorn were in springtime no less marvelous than in high summer. At last they came up the long road, and reached the very pass where the goblins had captured them before. But they came to that high point at morning, and looking backward they saw a white sun shining over the outstretched lands. There behind lay Mirkwood, blue in the distance and darkly green at the nearer edge, even in the spring. There far away was the lonely mountain on the edge of eyesight. On its highest peak, snow yet unmelted was gleaming pale. So comes snow after fire, and even dragons have their ending, said Bilbo, and he turned his back on his adventure. The Tookish part was getting very tired, and the Baggins was daily getting stronger. I wish now only to be in my own armchair, he said. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is now time. The final chapter. Chapter 19. The last stage. It was on May the 1st that the two came back at last to the brink of the valley of Rivendell, where stood the last, or the first, homely house. Again it was evening. Their ponies were tired, especially the one that carried the baggage, and they all felt in need of rest. As they rode down the steep path, Bilbo heard the elves still singing in the trees, as if they had not stopped since he left. And as soon as the riders came down into the lower glades of the wood, they burst into a song of much the same kind as before. This is something like it. Alright, I'm gonna have to sing this. I'm not gonna actually sing it, but I am gonna just like do it like a poem. The dragon is withered, his bones are now crumbled, his armor is shivered, his splendor is humbled. Wait, hold on, let me do this again. This is gonna be terrible. I already expected it to be terrible, but whatever. Trying to find a good beat for this. Well, I could probably read it like it's a poem, actually. Let's try that, instead of trying to sing it. The dragon is withered, his bones are now crumbled, his armor is shivered, his splendor is humbled. Those swords shall be rusted, and throne and crown perish, with strength that men trusted, and wealth that they cherish. Here grass is still growing, and leaves are yet swinging, the white water flowing, and elves are yet singing. Come, tra-la-la-lally, come back to the valley. The stars are far brighter than gems without measure. The moon is far whiter than silver in treasure. The fire is more shining on hearth than the gloaming. Let's try that again. The fire is more shining on hearth than the gloaming, than gold won by mining. So why go roaming? Ho! Tra-la-la-lolly, come back to the valley. Oh! Where are you going so late in returning? The river is flowing, the stars are all burning. Oh! Whither so laden, so sad and so dreary? Here elf and elf maiden, now welcome to the weary. With tra-la-la-lolly, come back to the valley. Tra-la-la-la-lolly, fa-la-la-lolly, fa-la. Could have been better. Moving on. Then the elves of the valley came out and greeted them and led them across the water to the house of Elrond. There a warm welcome was made them, and there were many eager ears that evening to hear the tale of their adventures. Gandalf it was who spoke, for Bilbo was fallen quiet and drowsy. Most of the tale he knew, for he had been in it, and had himself told much of it to the wizard on their homeward way, or in the house of Beorn. But every now and again he would open one eye and listen, when a part of the story which he did not yet know came in. It was in this way that he learned where Gandalf had been to, for he overheard the words of the wizard to Elrond. It appeared that Gandalf had been to a great council of the White Wizards, masters of lore and good magic, and that they had at last driven the necromancer from his dark hold in the south of Mirkwood. "Ere along now," Gandalf was saying, "the forest will grow somewhat more wholesome. The north will be freed from that horror for many long years, I hope. Yet I wish you were banished from the world." "It would be well indeed," said Elrond, "but I fear that will not come about in this age of the world, or for many after." Oh, excuse me. When the tale of their journeyings was told, there were other tales and yet more tales, tales of long ago, and tales of new things, and tales of no time at all, till Bilbo's head fell forward on his chest, and he snored comfortably in a corner. He woke to find himself in a white bed, and the moon shining through an open window. Below it many elves were singing loud and clear on the banks of the stream. "Sing all ye faithful, now sing all together, the winds in the air." Wait, hold on, let me say that again. "Sing all ye joyful, now sing all together, the winds in the treetop, the winds in the heather. The stars are in blossom, the moon is in flower, and bright are the windows of night in her tower. Dance all ye joyful, now dance all together. Soft is the grass, and lightfoot be like feather. The river is silver, the shadows are fleeting. Merry is Maytime, and merry our meeting. Sing we now softly, and dreams let us weave him. Wind him in slumber, and there let us leave him. The wanderer sleepeth, now soft be his pillow. Lullaby, lullaby, alder and willow. Sigh no more, pine, till the wind of the morn. Full moon, dark be the land, hush, hush, oak, ash, and thorn. Hushed be all water, till dawn is at hand." "Well, merry people," said Bilbo, looking out, "what time by the moon is this? Your lullaby would waken a drunken goblin. Yet I thank you." and your snores would waken a stone dragon. Yet we thank you, they answered with laughter. It is drawing towards dawn, and you have slept now since the night's beginning. Tomorrow perhaps you will be cured of weariness. A little sleep does a great cure in the house of Elrond, said he, but I will take all the care I can get. A second good night, fair friends. And with that he went back to bed and slept till late morning. Weariness fell from him soon in that house, and he had many a merry jest and dance, early and late, with the elves of the valley. Yet even that place could not long delay him now, and he thought always of his own home. After a week, therefore, he said farewell to Elrond, and giving him such small gifts as he would accept, he rode away with Gandalf. Even as they left the valley, the sky darkened in the west before them, and wind and rain came up to meet them. "Merry is Maytime," said Bilbo, as the rain beat into his face. "But our back is to legends, and we are coming home. I suppose this is the first taste of it." "There is a long road yet," said Gandalf. "But it is the last road," said Bilbo. He came to the river that marked the very edge of the borderland of the wild, and to the ford beneath its steep bank, which you may remember. The water was swollen both with the melting of the snows at the approach of summer, and with the day-long rain, but they crossed with some difficulty and pressed forward, as evening fell on the last stage of their journey. This was much as it had been before, except that the company was smaller and more silent. Also this time there was no trolls. At each point on the road, Bilbo recalled the happenings and the words of a year ago. It seemed to him more like 10. So that, of course, he quickly noted the place where the pony had fallen in the river, and they had turned aside for their nasty adventure with Tom and Bert and Bill. Not far from the road they found the gold of the trolls, which they had buried, still hidden and untouched. "I have enough to last me my time," said Bilbo, when they had dug it up. "You had better take this, Gandalf. I dare say you can find a use for it." "Indeed I can," said the wizard. "But share and share alike. You may find you have more needs than you expect." So they put the gold in bags and slung them on their ponies, who were not at all pleased about it. After that, their going was slower, for most of the time they walked. But the land was green, and there was much grass through which the Hobbit strolled along contentedly. He mopped his face with a red silk handkerchief. No! Not a single one of his own had survived. He had borrowed this one from Elrond, for now June had brought summer, and the weather was bright and hot again. As all things come to an end, even this story, a day came at last when they were in sight of the country where Bilbo had been born and bred, where the shapes of the land and of the trees were as well known to him as his hands and toes. Coming to a rise, he could see his own hill in the distance, and he stopped suddenly and said, "Roads go ever, ever on, over rock and wonder tree, by caves where never sun has shone, by streams that never find the sea, over snow and by winter stone, and through the merry flowers of June, over grass and over stone, and under mountain in the moon. Roads go ever, ever on, under cloud and under star, yet feet that wandering have gone, turn at last to home afar. Eyes that fair and sworn and sword have seen, and horror is the hall of stone. Look at last on the meadows green, and trees and hills they long have known." Gandalf looked at him. "My dear Bilbo," he said, "something is the matter with Something is the matter with you. You are not the hobbit that you were. And so they crossed the bridge and passed the mill by the river and came right back to Bilbo's own door. Bless me! What's going on? He cried. There was a great commotion, and people of all sorts, respectable and unrespectable, were thick round the door, and many were going in and out, not even wiping their feet on the mat, as Bilbo noticed with annoyance. If he was surprised, there were more surprised still. He had arrived back in the middle of an auction. There was a large notice in black and red hung on the gate, stating that on June the 22nd, Messrs. Grubb, and Burrows would sell by auction the effects of the late Bilbo Baggins, Esquire, of Baden, Underhill, Hobbiton, sale to commence at 10 o'clock sharp. It was now nearly lunchtime, and most of the things had already been sold, for various prices from next to nothing to old songs, as is not unusual at auctions. Bilbo's cousins, the Sackable Bagginses, were, in fact, busy measuring his rooms to see if their own furniture would fit. In short, Bilbo was presumed dead, and not everybody that said so was sorry to find the presumption wrong. The return of Mr. Bilbo Baggins created quite a disturbance, both under the hill and over the hill, and across the water. It was a great deal more than a 9 days' wonder. The legal bother, indeed, lasted for years. It was quite a long time before Mr. Baggins was in fact admitted to be alive again. The people who had got specially good bargains at the sale took a deal of convincing, and in the end, to save time, Bilbo had to buy back quite a lot of his own furniture. Many of his silver spoons mysteriously disappeared and were never accounted for. Personally, he suspected the Sackville Bagginses. On their side, they never admitted that the returned Baggins was genuine, and they were not on friendly terms with Bilbo ever after. They really had wanted to live in his nice hobbit hole so very much. You know, like typical asshole family members. Indeed, Bilbo found he had lost more than spoons. He had lost his reputation. It is true that forever after he remained an elf friend, and had the honor of dwarves, wizards, and all such folk as ever passed that way, but he was no longer quite respectable. He was in fact held by all the hobbits of the neighborhood to be queer, except by his nephews and nieces on the Took side, but even they were not encouraged in their friendship by their elders. I am sorry to say he did not mind. He was quite content, and the sound of the kettle on his hearth was ever after more musical than it had been, even in the quiet days before the unexpected party. His sword he hung over the mantelpiece. His coat of mail was arranged on a stand in the hall, until he lent it to a museum. His gold and silver was largely spent in presents, both useful and extravagant, which to a certain extent accounts for the affection of his nephews and his nieces. His magic ring he kept a great secret, for he chiefly used it when unpleasant callers came. He took to writing poetry and visiting the elves, and though many shook their heads and touched their foreheads, and said, "Poor old Baggins!" and though few believed any of his tales, he remained very happy to the end of his days, and those were extraordinarily long. One autumn evening, some years afterwards, Bilbo was sitting in his study writing his memoirs. He thought of calling them There and Back Again, A Hobbit's Holiday, when there was a ring at the door. It was Gandalf, and the dwarf was actually Balin. Come in," said Bilbo, and soon they were settled in chairs by the fire. If Balin noticed that Mr. Baggin's waistcoat was more extensive, and had real gold buttons, Bilbo also noticed that Balin's beard was several inches longer, and his jeweled beltway was of great magnificence. They fell to talking of their time together, of course, and Bilbo asked how things were going in the lands of the mountain. It seemed they were going very well. Bard had rebuilt the town and dale, and men had gathered to him from the lake and from south and west, and all the valley had become tilled again and rich, and the desolation was now filled with birds and blossoms in spring, and fruit and feasting in autumn. And Lake Town was refounded and was more prosperous than ever, and much wealth went up and down the running river, and there was friendship in those parts between elves and dwarves and men. The old master had come to a bad end. Bard had given him much gold for the help of the lake people, but being of the kind that easily catches such disease, he fell under the dragon sickness, and took most of the gold and fled with it, and died of starvation in the waste, deserted by his companions. The new master is of wiser kind, said Balin, and very popular for, of course, he gets most of the credit for the present prosperity. They are making songs which say that in his day the rivers run with gold. Then the prophecies of the old songs have turned out to be true, after a fashion, said Bilbo. Of course, said Gandalf, and why should not they prove true? Surely you don't disbelieve the prophecies because you had a hand in bringing them about yourself. You don't really suppose, do you, that all your adventures and escapes were managed by mere luck, just for your sole benefit? You are a very fine person, Mr. Baggins, and I am very fond of you, but you are only quite a little fellow in a wide world after all. Thank goodness, said Bilbo, laughing, and handed him the tobacco jar. And that is the final picture. And also the end of The Hobbit. Now, let's talk about this book for a second. This is a classic book, alright? Everybody, most people would probably know that. This book, from what we're seeing, this book initially came out in 1937. This version of the book looks like it came out in 1995, I guess. I guess here, but either way. So, the book was republished multiple times, but it first came out in 1937 from what I'm seeing in this story. So The Hobbit was a really good book. I did enjoy reading this book. It's like one of those old classic uh, adventure, fantasy kind of stories. I did enjoy reading this book. And I know why so many people liked it very much and why it was very highly voted for when it was on the poll that I made with this book being part of it. But this book won out very fast. Um, like very much so. And I can see why. So now because I've read it, you guys know I'll be doing a full audiobook of this, a full audiobook, a full audio thing of the story, like I am trying to do with all the other books that I've already read, and I have said so before. So, I'm going to be curious to see how the Lord of the Rings trilogy plays out alongside this book, and like I said before, over the next 3 weeks, I will be watching the movies directed by Peter Jackson that this book is based on. I know there were three movies. One was An Unexpected Journey. The second one involved Smaug, and the third was The Battle of the Five Armies. I believe were the titles there. So, I'm going to be curious to see how the rest of the story plays, what the differences between the book and the movie are. Should there be any, and just know there are going to be some. Out of 10, let's see. I would probably say this book would be a highly recommended book, to be honest. I would see, because, like, I don't know what I would rate it out of 10, to be honest. Because I know it would be a high rating because I did enjoy reading this book. Now, of course, some of the way this book is written, it involves some old school words that had old meanings, like the word queer. I have mentioned before many times during the readings that the meaning of the word queer in this case meant weird, just another word for weird from back in these days, not like how it is now with that word. But either way, I did enjoy reading this book, even with the with the old style ways of writing and some of the old words used in different contexts from modern times. And it's a good thing that this book will never be edited in a way to fit modern times, because sometimes the best way to read a book is to keep it as it was originally written. I remember one time, a number of years ago, I was in high school, and one of the books that I read was of the old classic uh, play Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. But this book had two different versions: the old version of the story that we all know, and a more modern take on the story. Why anybody would do a modern take on the story, I don't even know, but they did. Either way, if you guys like any kind of adventure story, highly recommend the book. You might like it yourself. Or if you have read The Lord of the Rings, but you never read The Hobbit, probably should read The Hobbit first. Probably should have read The Hobbit first, to be honest. But it is what it is, and it's a good story nonetheless. I did enjoy reading this. So yeah. With that being said, it is time to say goodbye to The Hobbit. And say hello to Stephen King's Salem's Lot. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you guys so much for watching this reading live stream of The Hobbit. Hope you guys enjoyed the reading streams hope you guys enjoyed the reading streams that I did with this story. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, this is Forrest Walpole, signing off.